The warehouse was considered impenetrable. Russia had just delivered another large shipment of ammunition, missiles, and military equipment there, directly to the forward supply line in Donetsk. It was surrounded by some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. And yet, within a few hours, that warehouse was burning. The explosions continued for several hours straight, and Moscow, right up until the last moment, believed that something like this was simply impossible. 27 Ukrainian FP-2 strike drones entered airspace that the Russian side considered securely locked down. They flew low, along hillsides, through valleys, over the treetops on the slopes of the Donetsky Ridge. Their target was a large ammunition depot that Russia had recently restocked with another major shipment of weapons and equipment. What happened next was not merely a military operation. It became a demonstration of how multi-layered breakthrough thinking works against multi-layered defense. At 5:25 local time, the duty commander of an S-350 Vityaz battery noticed something unusual on his radar screen. These were not the clean signatures of fighter aircraft that the system could immediately lock onto. They were faint, intermittent traces, appearing and disappearing in the background clutter from the terrain. The officer, with years of experience countering Ukrainian drones, understood. This was not a hardware malfunction. Something was entering the most vulnerable zone of the Russian air defense system. The 50N6A radar of the S-350 complex is capable of simultaneously tracking dozens of targets at long range. But the FP-2 is not a conventional target. The radar cross-section of these drones is hundreds of times smaller than the objects the system was originally designed to engage. On the operator's display, 27 signatures flickered in and out. The battery commander leaned closer to the screen. The traces moved too evenly for birds. Too low and too rhythmically, with the characteristic vibration of piston engines with propellers. He pressed the launch button. 2 missiles left the launchers, accelerated to Mach 4, and raced toward the barely visible signatures above the slope. But physics worked against the S-350. At low altitude, every radar pulse did not merely touch the drones. It bounced off hillsides, metal rooftops, and antenna clusters. The real target and its false reflection merged on the screen. The guidance system had fractions of a second to choose, and both missiles chose wrong. 2 rings of fire flashed in the air. Not a single drone was hit. It was at this moment that the FP-2s executed their first tactical maneuver. They shut down their engines for a few seconds, dropped even lower, and passed through the interference zone like ghosts, vanishing from the radar screens. Then 2 lead drones sharply gained altitude, powered their engines to full thrust, and became the brightest signatures in the sky. They had deliberately made themselves bait. The S-350 shifted its lock. The next 2 missiles found their targets. Both decoy drones were destroyed. But while the system spent time intercepting them, the remaining 25 aircraft passed through the first line of defense and continued toward the target. Exactly 1 hour later, the surviving group entered what was known as the Fortress Belt. The terrain here was a nightmare for radar operators. Hills, mine spoil heaps, metal warehouses, industrial zones, hundreds of reflection and concealment points. That was precisely why the Borisov 2 electronic warfare system was hidden here. At 6:26 local time, the navigation receiver of the lead drone still showed a stable signal from multiple satellites. But the moment the group entered the coverage zone of Borisov 2, everything changed, instantly. The satellite signal did not fade gradually. It vanished all at once, as if the sky above them had simply been erased. The system suppressed GPS and GLONASS signals from the ground, at a distance thousands of times shorter than the satellite's orbit. For the small receiver of the FP2, this was not interference. It was an electronic storm. The remaining 25 aircraft switched to inertial navigation, gyroscopes, accelerometers, and preloaded route data. But inertial navigation accumulates error with every mile travelled. At a speed of around 100 miles per hour, even a slight angular deviation over several dozen miles could push the entire group outside the safe corridor, directly into air defense kill zones, or past the target entirely. 4 lead drones made a decision that the algorithm calculated coldly and precisely, sacrificed themselves to preserve the mission. At 6:29, they broke radio silence. For 3 seconds, they transmitted a short burst of signals, a navigation correction request, a target coordinate update, a formation resynchronization command. Borisogledsk 2 instantly detected these emissions. The electronic warfare stations relayed the data to a Buk M3 surface-to-air missile system. 4 missiles went airborne and found the 4 drones that had deliberately revealed their presence. But in those seconds, the remaining group received exactly what it needed. Coordinates were corrected, inertial error was compensated, formation was resynchronized. 2 more drones were lost later. They deliberately drew the attention of the next defensive line. After the fortress belt, 17 aircraft remained in formation. But the group did not know that the next threat was not looking at the sky. It was listening to the ground. The Penicillin 1B75 system, an acoustic, seismic, and infrared reconnaissance complex, had been tracking the approaching drones for 7 minutes. It used no radar. It detected engine vibrations propagating through the soil and metal structures, picked up the steady hum of piston motors, and registered the thermal signature from fuel combustion. 15 FP2s flying through the industrial zone at approximately 100 feet altitude left faint but stable traces. Their formation had a pattern: equal spacing between aircraft, equal speed, equally low altitude. To a conventional radar, clutter. To penicillin, a calculable regularity. The data was relayed to a Pantsir S1 battery. The commander chose minimal radar operating time, 8 seconds for target acquisition and launch. The 57E6E missile accelerated to Mach 3 and headed toward the calculated intercept point. The warning reached the drones, not from a screen, but as the sound of a rising roar from behind. The first aircraft attempted an evasive maneuver, but an explosion at roughly 60 feet tore it from the formation. Its destruction warned the rest. The group immediately changed tactics. The drones dispersed, stopped maintaining equal intervals, and began constantly varying altitude and engine power. The acoustic and thermal pattern by which penicillin had been tracking the group began to break apart. Subsequent Pantsir missiles no longer found clean solutions. They detonated above the dispersed formation, scattering fragments into empty air. But one aircraft, which had fallen behind after a sharp maneuver, was still caught. Of 17, 13 remained. When the target was approximately 6 miles away, Russian FPV Kamikaze drones entered the fight. 15 drones with a single mission: to ram the FP2s head-on. The first 3 attacked from the flank. 2 impacts, one to a wing and one to a tail rotor, knocked out 2 more Ukrainian drones. But the Ukrainian operator immediately recognized the logic of the threat. FPVs are limited by range and battery life. The FP2 group stretched out in a wide arc along the edge of the industrial zone, forcing the Russian kamikazes to chase targets far beyond their optimal control range. Batteries drained. Signals weakened between metal rooftops and warehouses. One by one, the FPVs lost altitude and fell into the void. The last one still caught the trailing aircraft, which had lost speed after a wide turn. The Russian FPV ring was almost entirely expended. 10 FP2s remained. The final line of defense was two 2S-38 Derivatsia PVO anti-aircraft artillery systems, 57mm automatic cannons with programmable airburst rounds. They did not chase the drones. They built a wall of fragments in front of them. The first salvo tore the wing off one FP2. The second damaged the engine of another. But the distance was already too small. The 8 remaining aircraft passed through the fire and turned onto their final attack heading. At 6:48 local time, 8 FP2s reached the target. GPS was no longer needed. The optical cameras in their nose sections autonomously acquired the main warehouse. The first drone punched through the steel roof and detonated inside the storage facility. The second struck directly into the breach and reached the ammunition. The chain reaction began immediately. Artillery shells, missiles, and military equipment detonated one after another. Columns of fire erupted from the warehouse. The blast wave demolished auxiliary buildings, tore roofs off storage structures, and scattered military trucks. Subsequent strikes engulfed loading areas, secondary storage facilities, and equipment near the base perimeter. The last FP2 entered the most intact section of the warehouse complex and collapsed it from within. The explosions continued for several hours. The black smoke was visible from a great distance. The losses extended beyond the destroyed ammunition. Security personnel and loading crews suffered serious casualties. The base's transport infrastructure was effectively paralysed. Tactically, Russia lost a large shipment of artillery shells, missiles, and equipment that had just been moved to the front line. Strategically, the blow was more painful. This warehouse was a critical logistics hub linking supply from Russian territory to the Donbass axis. When it burned, the pressure of Russian artillery on Ukrainian positions in Donetsk immediately eased. This operation was not an isolated event. It was part of a series of coordinated strikes against Russia's logistics chain. Each target a separate link. This warehouse was the ammunition link. 8 FP2 drones passed through the S-350, Borisogledsk-2, Buk M3, Pantsir S-1, FPV Kamikazes, and 57mm anti-aircraft artillery. They found a gap at every line and struck a place Russia believed was out of reach. This proves what Moscow does not want to acknowledge. Even the densest and most advanced air defense system is not absolute, if the adversary is willing to pay the price at every level and knows precisely where to look for the weak point. If this analysis was useful to you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. What do you think? How will the tactics of small, low-altitude drones continue to change the nature of combat? See you in the next video.